daughter told me I was an embarrassment to her career, so I quietly transferred every dollar of the business she thought she'd inherit, all $2.3 million of it, to people who actually knew what family meant. My daughter is a cardiologist, 41 years old, works at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago, makes somewhere north of $400,000 a year. She drives a white Tesla, wears clothes I couldn't afford in a month of Sundays back when I was running the floor at Breckenridge Tile and Stone, and she lives rent-free in the house I paid off in 2009. The 3-bedroom brick colonial on Elm Creek Drive in Naperville that I bought for $147,000 in 1994 and that Zillow now tells me is worth $890,000. Not that I checked or anything. I am 68 years old. I started working when I was 14, sweeping a warehouse floor after school for $3 an hour. I have never once in my life asked someone else to carry my weight. But last March, my daughter looked at me across a dinner table full of her hospital colleagues and said, in a voice calm enough to stop my heart, that I was, and I am quoting exactly, a sweet man, but honestly, a little out of his depth at events like this. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and said, "You're probably right, sweetheart." What she didn't know was that by that point, I had already started making 3 phone calls that would change everything she thought was waiting for her. Let me tell you who she used to be first, because she wasn't always like this. When she was 9 years old, she'd sit on a bucket in the back of my truck while I drove between job sites, asking me the names of every tool in the bed. She knew the difference between a wet saw and an angle grinder before she could multiply fractions. Saturday morning, she'd help me load tile samples into the showroom, chattering the whole time about school, about her friends, about what she wanted to be. Back then, it changed every week. Veterinarian, astronaut, maybe a tile lady like you, Dad. I still have a picture of her at age 11 standing behind the showroom counter with my apron on, grinning so wide you can see the gap where she lost a tooth. That little girl grew up and became someone I recognized less and less with every year that passed. The first sign was subtle. She started correcting me in public. Not big things, just small ones. The way I said, irregardless. The way I left my fork. The way I laughed too loud at my own stories. I chalked it up to stress. Medical training is brutal. People get sharp when they're tired. Then she moved back to Chicago for her fellowship, and I told her she could stay at the house instead of paying rent downtown. I figured it would give us time together. What it gave me instead was a front row seat to who she'd become. The photos disappeared first, our family pictures. Her mother and me at our wedding in 1981. The Christmas her brother Teddy got his first real bike. The shot of all 4 of us at Sleeping Bear Dunes the summer before her mother passed. They came down one weekend while I was visiting my buddy Ray in Grand Rapids. I came home to blank walls and a vague explanation about the space needing to feel more minimal. Then came the introductions. A colleague named Dr. Whitmore came to the house for dinner one evening, and my daughter introduced me as Gerald, our property manager. Gerald. Gerald is my name, but property manager? I've owned that house for 30 years. I'm the one who regrouted the master bath and replaced the furnace and rebuilt the back deck with my own 2 hands. Property manager. I didn't say anything. I shook Dr. Whitmore's hand and asked if he wanted more green beans. The renovation request came in January. "Dad, the kitchen really needs updating. My colleagues come over and it reads as very dated. The laminate countertops, the appliances, it's just not a great look. If you invest now, you'll get the money back when you sell." She had a contractor picked out already. $58,000 for quartz countertops, new cabinetry, a 6-burner range she would never cook on. I wrote the check because she was my daughter and I thought that's what fathers did. When it was finished, she posted photos on Instagram with the caption, "Finally made this space, something I'm proud to share." No mention of who paid for it. No mention of the man who'd eaten 30 years of breakfasts at that kitchen table. Just the hashtags and the compliments rolling in. The thing about watching all of this happen is that you keep finding reasons for it. She's busy. She's stressed. She's building a career in a competitive field. You tell yourself that underneath all of it, the daughter you knew is still in there somewhere, just buried under the pressure of becoming someone remarkable. You wait for her to come back. The dinner in March was the night I stopped waiting. She had organized a get-together for a few of her colleagues from the cardiology department. 8 people, bottles of wine I couldn't identify by name, cheese that came in little paper-wrapped wedges at $22 each. I had cooked that afternoon. A pot of beef stew, her mother's recipe, the one she used to request every birthday. I thought maybe we'd make it a real evening. Something warm, something like the dinners we used to have when she was growing up. She met me at the kitchen door. "Dad, I ordered from Monteverde. It's delivered. Could you just maybe keep the stew for yourself this week?" I said, "Okay." I put the lid back on the pot. Then her guests arrived and I tried to be sociable. The way you do, asking about their work, listening to their hospital stories. At some point her colleague, a young woman doing her residency, asked how I was connected to the house, and before I could answer, my daughter smiled and said, "Gerald's been amazing. He keeps the place running. He's a sweet man, but honestly, a little out of his depth at events like this. A sweet man. Out of his depth." I built the floor she was standing on. Not figuratively, literally. I tore out the old tile in 1998 and laid the hardwood myself over a long weekend, her mother handing me tools and Teddy crawling around underfoot. I paid this mortgage through the 2008 recession when my business dropped 40% and I was driving a truck with a cracked windshield because I couldn't afford to fix it. I put her through 12 years of school, starting with undergrad at Michigan and ending with Northwestern Medical, and I did it on the back of a tile company that I built with my own hands, starting with nothing but a truck, a wet saw, and a willingness to answer the phone at 7 in the morning. But I was out of my depth at events like this. I excused myself, went upstairs, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. Then I made 3 calls that I had honestly been turning over in my mind for longer than I wanted to admit. The first was to my accountant, a quiet man named Burl Cosgrove, who has handled my books for 22 years and who has never once in that time told me what to do with my own money. I asked him to walk me through the current valuation of Breckenridge Tile and Stone. We talked for 40 minutes. The business was worth $2.3 million. The client contracts, the equipment, the name, the supplier relationships I'd spent decades building, more than I'd ever stopped to add up out loud. The second call was to an attorney named Hatch, over on 5th Avenue, a woman who does estate and business succession work. I asked her what it would take to transfer ownership of a small business out of my name and into a trust, benefiting specific individuals of my choosing. She said she could have documents drafted within 2 weeks. The third call was to my nephew, Corrado. Corrado is 34 years old. His mother was my late wife's sister, which makes him family in the way that sometimes matters more than blood. He grew up working summers in my showroom, learned to read an estimate before he learned to drive, and has been managing a tile installation crew in Indianapolis for the last 8 years for a man who doesn't pay him what he's worth. I told him I wanted to talk about his future. He thought I was calling to offer him a supervisory role. What I was actually calling to do was offer him everything. 3 weeks later, I had also spoken to Corrado's younger sister, Willa, who has a business degree from Purdue and has been doing the books for a small flooring distributor in Fort Wayne, and to a young man named Seb, the son of my oldest friend from the early days. A kid who'd grown up hearing stories about Breckenridge and who had been asking me for years if there was ever a way in. 26 years old, works harder than anyone I have hired in the last decade, and has never once in his life been handed anything. I did not tell my daughter any of this was happening. She had her own life to manage. She was busy. She was, after all, out of her depth at events like mine. By June, the transfer was complete. Breckenridge Tile and Stone now belonged to a family trust with 3 beneficiaries, Corrado, Willa, and Seb. I had retained a small advisory role and a fair market buyout agreement that paid me in installments, enough to live on comfortably, enough to do what I actually wanted to do, which was drive out to the Pacific coast and spend 3 months looking at the ocean, something I had promised myself for 25 years and never done. Because there was always another job to quote, another invoice to chase. I moved out of the Naperville house quietly on a Tuesday in July, took my tools, my wife's recipe box, A box of photos that I had retrieved from the basement storage unit where my daughter had apparently stored them to keep them from interfering with the minimal aesthetic. Left the furniture, left the kitchen that cost $58,000 and that she would apparently now have to explain to a landlord or a new owner because I had also, while I was at it, listed the house. A family from Downers Grove made a cash offer in 11 days, closed in 30. My daughter found out about the house the way she found out about most things that happened in my life, after the fact, from someone else. In this case, it was her brother Teddy, who I had told simply because I didn't want him blindsided. Teddy called her. She called me. Dad, what did you do? Sold the house, sweetheart. You can't. Where are you supposed to live? I'm in New Mexico at the moment. Nice place, dry heat. A silence that lasted long enough for me to watch a hummingbird investigate the feeder outside my motel window and then leave. What about my stuff? My things are in that house. I had them packed and put in storage in Naperville. I left you the unit number and an email. The first month's paid. Another silence. Dad, I need to talk to you about this. Of course, I'm not hard to reach. She flew out to see me 2 weeks later. We sat in the courtyard of the casita I was renting in Santa Fe, which I had found online for $1,200 a month, and which had a kitchen garden and a view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that made me feel, for the first time in years, like a person who had made some right choices. She had the look people get when they are trying to decide whether to lead with anger or with grief. And eventually, she settled on something in between. I don't understand why you did this without telling me. I did it the way you make decisions about things that are yours to decide, I said, quietly. The house was going to come to me eventually. It was my house, same as the business. She looked at me, and I watched her realize that she had never in the course of all this stopped to ask herself what I might want. Not what was convenient for me to provide, what I might want for my own life. I didn't know you were unhappy, she finally said. I know. I didn't mean to make you feel. I know that too. We were quiet a while. The garden smelled like lavender and dry earth, and somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't catch. What about the business? She asked. I told her about Corrado and Willa and Seb. I watched her do the math on what she had assumed was waiting for her. $2.3 million in equity in a business she had never once asked about, never visited, never expressed any interest in beyond the fact of its existence as a future inheritance. You gave it to cousins. I gave it to people who will use it the way it was meant to be used, who already know what it means to work hard and not be sure whether it will be enough. She looked at the mountains for a long time. You did this because of what I said at dinner. I did this because of who I'd become in that house, in that life. I was Gerald, the property manager. I was out of my depth. I want to find out what I am when I'm not being that. She cried some. I let her. I have spent a lot of years trying to fix things for her when what she needed was to sit with something uncomfortable. What happened after she left is the part that still surprises me. Corrado called me from the showroom on his second week running things, sounding both terrified and more alive than I had heard him in years. Uncle Gerald, the Hendricks account called. They want to expand the contract. What do I tell them? I talked him through it for 20 minutes, the way my own father had once talked me through things over a bad phone connection from 2 states away. At the end he said, I'm going to make you proud. I believed him. Willa sent me a spreadsheet she'd put together restructuring the supplier contracts. Things I'd been meaning to revisit for 4 years. She had it done in a week. I looked at it and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Seb texted me a photo of a job he'd managed solo, a complete floor installation at a restaurant in the West Loop, 3,000 square feet of marble, perfect seams, every cut right, no caption, just the photo. That's how I knew he understood the language. These 3 people. They didn't just take over a business. They took something I had spent 40 years building, and they held it like it mattered. That's rarer than people think. I am writing this from a rented room in Taos, New Mexico. I have a used pickup truck, my tools, a new phone that Corrado helped me set up, and approximately 8 months' worth of patience left in me for the question of what comes next. My daughter and I talk on the phone most Sundays. It is slow going. There are long stretches of silence that neither of us rush to fill. She asked me last week if I missed the house. I told her I missed her mother, which is the more accurate answer, and that the house was just the container that had kept the grief in one place. She was quiet for a while, and then she said she missed her mother too. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without talking much at all, which was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I don't know what we are building toward, the two of us. Maybe something. Maybe she will one day sit across from someone and say, "My father built that business from nothing," and mean it the way it was meant to be said. Maybe she won't. But here is what I know. I drove across the Jemez Mountains last Thursday at dusk, and the light was the color of something I don't have a word for, and the road was empty, and the radio was playing a song my wife used to love, and I pulled over and just sat there for a while, engine off, watching the sky. For the first time in longer than I can count, nobody needed me to be anything in particular. It turned out that was worth more than $2.3 million. But the $2.3 million helped.